You'll remember when Americans picked up their newspapers one morning and read the incredible news of a fatal quarrel between Germany and Czechoslovakia, an unknown and faraway country to us then. That was December 1938. World War II was shaping up. As the war years progressed, I made up my mind that one day I would visit Czechoslovakia, birthplace of my ancestors. I kept that promise to myself soon after the war. And this is the movie I brought home with me. It seemed hardly any time at all before we were winging over Prague. They call it the Golden City, the city of 100 spires, and I was anxious to begin exploring it. A few minutes later, we were dipping down onto the big airfield at Ruzyně, about 5 miles from the center of Prague. Most of the other passengers were businessmen, but I was just anticipating the pleasures of looking around. I was glad the customs officer spoke English. I learned later that in the Prague night school, it's the favorite language to study. The next morning, I was up bright and early. I wanted just to walk through the streets, look around, and get to know the atmosphere of Prague. My first encounter with authority was in the middle of the street. The authority was a policeman who cautioned me about jaywalking. He could have given me a fine, but since I was a foreigner, he let me off with a friendly warning. I got on a trolley to begin my sightseeing tour. First, the National Theater. It was opened in 1881 and then burned down after the first performance. It was rebuilt completely with funds raised by popular subscription. That's why it's a national theater in a special sort of way. I soon found that Prague is a tourist's paradise. This is one of the world's most famous old stone bridges. You have to cross it to get to the castle. If these statues of saints could speak, they'd tell strange tales of invading and liberating armies, crossing and recrossing the bridge during the past 600 years. Up on the hill is the President's Castle. The grounds contain 2 cathedrals. One is a sort of Czech Westminster Abbey. Roman emperors are buried here, and Czech kings, including good King Wenceslas. At the main gate of the castle stands a soldier whose uniform reminded me of the British soldiers I met during the war. Looking down from the embattlements, I had a wonderful view of Prague's Gothic, Baroque, and Rococo architecture. I tried my hand at map reading. Typical tourist, I guess. Maps, guidebooks, and all. The houses are so old they seem to lean on one another's shoulders as they climb the hill towards the castle. Back down in the center of Prague, I was surrounded by modern buildings. It seemed like a different world. I had a few minutes to spare while waiting for a Czech friend, so I took the opportunity to do a little window shopping. A fascinating pastime for a foreigner in a strange country. I made a mental note of the fashion accessories for sale. Thought it might be interesting to friends back home. Costume jewelry is lovely in Czechoslovakia and so inexpensive. I saw a beautiful pearl necklace for just a few dollars. It had easily cost about $50 on Fifth Avenue. Here you see my friend arriving. Only 15 minutes late, not bad for a Czech or any young lady. We set forth exploring and worked up quite an appetite doing the rounds of churches and palaces. Dasha, that's my Czech friend, chose an excellent restaurant high above the city. It was very gay dining outdoors, and with an orchestra for dancing, too. We ran into a group of Dasha's friends. Imagine my surprise to discover Johnny, an old college chum of mine, here on an educational tour of Europe. Ah, that Czech Pilsner beer, there's nothing like it. We all made a fine afternoon of it, Dasha, her friends, Johnny, and I. Next day, I got on a train to the Škoda Works to see the manufacture of railway items. There was a terrific amount of destruction during the war, but the loss of rolling stock has already been made good. But still more is needed to catch up with a big increase in industry and agriculture. Life is in a hurry for the Czechs after 6 years of going slow for the Germans. They're now working and building at top speed so they can overtake and pass the pre-war standard of living. One expression of speed is the new locomotives they're building at Škoda, which can do more than 100 miles an hour. I traveled in a train pulled by one of these new locomotives when I went down to the Tatra Auto Plant in Moravia. The Tatra has an 8-cylinder air-cooled engine which is fitted in the rear of the car. The Czechs have put a lot of their feeling for speed and streamlining into the new Tatra. A beauty, isn't it? But for the time being, I had to be content with walking. I wanted to see more of Czech manufacturing, so I went up to Gotwaldov, the home of the Czech shoe industry. 30 years ago, it was just a little country town. Then Tomáš Baťa, the founder of these factories, studied mass production methods in America. The conveyor belt was introduced to the people of this region. Jan Baťa took over after his brother's death, and the conveyor belt went faster. Political thought was controlled by Baťa's own motion pictures and newspapers. Trade unions were suppressed. When the Germans occupied the country, they found a willing collaborator in Jan Baťa. He put boots on the German army. But one day the Nazis had to run for it, and Baťa got the boot. The original name Zlín, so closely connected with the unpopular Baťa, was changed in 1948 to Gotwaldov, after the president of the country. The workers' homes are near the factory. The happy children you see here live in one of the most modern cities in the world. It seems impossible to believe that we're still in Central Europe, in a country where winter temperatures drop to 20 degrees below zero. But this is a vineyard in Czechoslovakia, not in Italy. Not only grapes, but millions of tobacco plants grow up here too. In the mountain villages, they still wear the national costumes. And though they do have a Sunday best, the costume is for everyday wear, not something put on just for the benefit of tourists. The men, too, have quite a taste for color. Their embroidered jackets are fine examples of peasant art. Probably most of you have heard of the High Tatra. Some of the peaks in the chain are over 8,000 feet high. There are many health resorts up here. The luxury hotels used to be the preserves of the very rich. Lately, trade unions have taken over many of them, so workers and their families now may spend their holidays here. I saw many convalescent homes and sanatoriums here, too. I went to see the famous TB Sanatorium, said to be one of the best on the continent. It's a huge place, and I thought there must be thousands of patients. Actually, there are only 600. There are more on the staff than there are in the beds. I took a cable car over the peaks and was quickly rewarded by seeing a number of wild goats at very close range. They're rarely seen so near. Then I took to my feet, and though I was in the midst of ice and snow, I got so hot I had to shed most of my clothes. Looking past the mountains to the distance beyond, I realized I was almost within sight of another faraway unknown country, Soviet Russia. The shepherds who lead their sheep in this part of the country could belong to almost any century at all. But this is very much a country of the 20th century, and it has suffered deeply from the 20th century madness of war. Destruction here was almost greater than in any other part of the Republic. The people are rebuilding as fast as they can. My strenuous activity on the mountains left my legs aching so much that I began to think of recuperating in one of the spas. I chose one with a formidable name of Trenchanska Teplica. Here you drink the healthful mineral water and let your extra weight be wound down or even tickled out of you. After this, you go along for a nice, clean bath. The mud is a peaceful application of radioactivity and feels much better than it looks. Having rested my limbs, I decided to have a look at Bratislava, an inland port on the Danube. It's the capital of Slovakia, and the people are as proud of it as the Praguists are of their city. It was my last port of call in Slovakia. From there, I took the Slovak Arrow, a motor express, back to Moravia. The trip across the Moravian plain was made interesting by an excellent lunch and by a group of young people I met there. We struck up an acquaintance. There was a mixture of Czech, French, German, and American, so conversation was a bit difficult. I was awfully pleased with the friendliness and amiability of the Czech people. I got out at Brno, the center of a rich agricultural area and yet a highly industrialized town. Brno is the capital of Moravia. There were settlements on this site as far back as Roman times. Brno has had a stormy history, and within its walls, Czech, German, Polish, Tatar, Hungarian, Prussian, and French armies have been encamped. As in Prague, Gothic, Baroque, and modern architecture blend in with each other quite happily. If I had been an artist, this is the scene I would have liked to paint best of all. It's Brno's famous fruit market, very colorful and absolutely Czech. An artist's dream, and a very good market, too. It was in the Czechoslovak Arms Works that the light machine gun was made that is known as the Bren. It was later improved upon in England. Today, the production is geared for peaceful purposes, with emphasis on farming equipment so necessary for Czechoslovakia's agricultural development. The Brno Fortress, known as Špilberk, is famous in European history. It has been the guest house of French, Italian, and Polish revolutionaries. The medieval torture chambers still exist, and the guide made our blood curdle with his graphic descriptions of how the various instruments worked. One thing I noticed puzzled me, the presence of telephone cables in brick and concrete. Well, these details belong to a story which not only the guide knew, but also the people all over Czechoslovakia. It was the story of the 20th century torturers. The Nazis had modernized the torture chambers and improved upon them. This is where resistance fighters were tortured and killed. Here's a memorial put up for them. Up on the rocks was a little chapel where the Nazis built a new altar for their new god. And beside the altar stand grim and silent reminders of their new religion. This barren stretch was once covered by a lovely village. This place was Lidice, the scene of the Nazis' most colossal and treacherous destruction. They tried to obliterate every human being, every trace of the village. The men were shot. The women turned into concentration camps. The children dispersed all over Germany. Even the graves were dug up and the remains destroyed. Seeing this place, I began to understand something of how the Czechs feel about the Germans. The Nazis did their work of destruction thoroughly. They never dreamed that one day young people from all over the world would help to rebuild the village of Lidice. Let's hope that this is a sign for the future. People of the world living and working together, building and not destroying. There will be much of the international in the new Lidice. A big part of the reconstruction funds were raised in Britain and America. Lidice was the last place I visited. Soon after this, I was on my way back home. Below me, I saw Prague, a golden city, capital of a country which is no longer unknown and far away.